The mad French tank that rolled on giant wheels over 16-foot trenches. Picture a machine that looks like it rolled straight out of a fever dream. 2 enormous wheels, each standing 3 stories tall, connected by a steel cage chassis. No tracks, no conventional armor. Just massive metal hoops designed to roll over trenches wide enough to swallow a house. This was the Boirault machine, and in 1915, the French military believed it could break the deadlock of the Western Front. They were spectacularly wrong. But the reason why, the fatal engineering flaw that doomed this bizarre contraption, reveals something darker about the desperation of the Great War. By the autumn of 1915, the trenches had become tombs. From the English Channel to the Swiss border, hundreds of miles of zigzagging scars carved through the landscape. Men lived in mud. They died by the thousands for gains measured in yards. Machine guns made crossing no man's land a death sentence. Barbed wire turned the earth into an impenetrable maze. And the trenches themselves, some dug 16 feet wide and 12 feet deep, formed barriers that no cavalry, no infantry charge, no amount of artillery could overcome. The French General Staff knew they needed something revolutionary, something that could simply roll over these obstacles as if they didn't exist. Traditional thinking wouldn't save them. They needed imagination. They needed innovation. What they got was Louis Boirault. Boirault was an engineer, not a military man. He looked at the trench problem differently. While others were experimenting with tracked vehicles and armored boxes, Boirault had a simpler vision. Why not just make the wheels big enough, enormous enough to step over any trench the Germans could dig? The concept was almost childlike in its directness. Build 2 giant wheels, connect them with a framework. Let physics do the rest. The design that emerged was unlike anything the world had seen. The Boirault machine stood over 40 feet tall when fully assembled. Each wheel measured roughly 40 feet in diameter. Imagine a Ferris wheel laid on its side and set in motion across a battlefield. These weren't solid wheels. They were constructed from steel lattice frameworks, like the skeleton of a massive hoop, with metal plates attached to form the outer rim. The wheels were connected by a rectangular steel cage chassis, suspended between them like a gondola, hanging between 2 monstrous gears. Inside this cage sat the engine, a gasoline-powered motor that drove both wheels through a chain system. The crew compartment, if you could call it that, occupied a small armored box within the framework. 2 men operated this mechanical giant. One drove, one managed the engine. Both presumably prayed. The armor was minimal. Steel plates protected the crew compartment, but much of the machine remained exposed framework. Weight was the enemy. Each wheel already weighed several tons. Add too much armor, and the whole contraption would sink into the soft mud of the battlefield, rendering its trench-crossing ability worthless. Boirault calculated that lighter was better. Mobility over protection. It was a gamble that assumed the machine would move too quickly for accurate enemy fire. That assumption would prove optimistic. Before we go on, if forgotten and impossible war machines fascinate you, subscribe to Forgotten War Relics and hit the bell so you never miss one. The theoretical maximum speed was just over 3 miles per hour, slower than a walking pace. In practice, across rough terrain, it moved considerably slower. But speed wasn't really the point. The point was getting across. A 16-foot trench, the wheels would simply roll over it, bridging the gap with their enormous diameter. Barbed wire, crushed beneath tons of rolling steel? Machine gun nests? The plan called for mounting weapons on the framework, though exactly how effective they would be on a platform that swayed and lurched with every rotation remained unclear. Construction began in late 1915. The French military, desperate for any solution, authorized a prototype. The War Ministry didn't commit to full production, not yet, but they gave Boirault enough resources to prove his concept. A testing ground was prepared. Engineers assembled the massive wheels. Workers welded the chassis framework. The motor was installed and tested. By early 1916, the Boirault machine was ready for its first trials. It looked impressive. Photographs from the period show the machine towering over the men who built it. From a distance, it had a certain terrible logic. You could see how those wheels might work, how they might carry this steel cage across obstacles that stopped everything else. The French observers who gathered to watch the initial tests felt something like hope. Perhaps this strange contraption really could change everything. The machine rolled forward on level ground. The wheels turned. The chassis moved. For those first few moments, watching this mechanical monster in motion must have felt like witnessing the future. Something impossible made real. A solution to the unsolvable problem of trench warfare. But the Western Front wasn't level ground. And what happened when the Boirault machine encountered the conditions it was actually designed for? The mud, the craters, the uneven nightmare landscape of no man's land would expose a flaw so fundamental, so utterly devastating, that this ambitious dream would collapse under its own weight. The testing ground included trenches, deep ones, obstacles, everything the machine would face in real combat. The observers watched as the Boirault machine approached its first major test, a simulated trench 16 feet wide. The wheels began their rotation. The entire framework tilted forward. For a moment, it seemed to work. The front wheel descended into the trench. The chassis followed. The physics appeared sound. Then the mud factor revealed itself. The wheels, enormous as they were, began to sink. Not catastrophically at first, just enough to matter, just enough to throw off the careful calculations. The motor strained. The chains that connected the wheels groaned under pressure. And then, as the machine attempted to climb out of the trench, the weight distribution shifted in ways Boirault hadn't fully accounted for. The chassis twisted, metal screamed. The machine lurched sideways, tilting at an angle that made the observers step back instinctively. It didn't flip. Not quite. But it came close enough that everyone watching understood what they were seeing. This wasn't a solution. This was a death trap. The motor cut out. Silence fell over the testing ground. The Boirault machine sat half in, half out of the trench, tilted at that impossible angle, its wheels partially buried in soil that was only slightly damp compared to the apocalyptic mud of Flanders or the Somme. If it couldn't handle controlled test conditions, what would happen when artillery, craters, and shell-churned earth were added to the equation? No combat statistics exist for the Boirault machine because it never saw combat. The French military, having witnessed the trials, made their decision quickly. No production order was issued. No deployment was authorized. The prototype became the only example ever built. The fundamental problem was inescapable. Those massive wheels, designed to roll over obstacles, created their own catastrophic weakness. The larger the wheel, the deeper it could sink into soft ground. The heavier the framework needed to be, the more powerful the engine required. Every solution created new problems. The mathematics of trench crossing collided with the physics of weight and ground pressure, and the Boirault machine lost. By late 1916, British engineers had already demonstrated their own solution: the tracked tank. The Chassis Mark I tanks at Flers-Courcelette proved that distributed weight across continuous tracks could cross trenches without the massive structural problems of wheels. The tracks spread the load. They didn't sink the same way. They could pivot and adjust to uneven ground in ways rigid wheel frameworks never could. Boirault's machine was quietly dismantled. The wheels were likely scrapped for metal. The framework disappeared. No museum preserved it. No military archive kept detailed blueprints. Even photographs are rare. The machine that promised to revolutionize warfare was forgotten within months of its failure. But the idea didn't die completely. Decades later, during World War II, designers briefly reconsidered wheeled assault vehicles. Some experimental armored cars used oversized wheels for rough terrain. None approached the scale or ambition of Boirault's creation, and none solved the fundamental problem he'd encountered. Physics doesn't care about ambition. The Boirault machine represents something deeper than failed engineering. It shows how desperation can drive innovation toward impossible solutions. How the pressure of total war can make even absurd ideas seem reasonable. How sometimes the most dramatic answer to a problem is simply the wrong answer, no matter how impressive it looks. Louis Boirault returned to obscurity after the war. His name doesn't appear in histories of tank development. The lineage of modern armored warfare runs through tracked vehicles, not wheeled assault machines. His contribution, if it can be called that, was proving what didn't work. Sometimes that's just as valuable as discovering what does. The trenches that killed millions were eventually overcome, but not by giant wheels rolling over them, by tracks that could grip and distribute and adapt, by designs that accepted the chaos of the battlefield instead of trying to dominate it through sheer mechanical force. The Boirault machine rolled into history's scrap heap, a monument to ambition, a reminder that sometimes the strangest weapons are strange for good reason. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Forgotten War Relics for more of the strangest machines history forgot.